Welcome to This Explainer. So, you're eyeing the Canadian market, right? It makes total sense. Canada is famous for its incredibly stable business environment, a super skilled workforce, and, let's be honest, that prime proximity right next to the US is a massive advantage. But if you're an international founder, you're probably staring down a maze of regulations and wondering, where do I even start? Well, today we're breaking down the 2026 Guide to Starting a Business in Canada as a Non-Resident, presented by MRZ Canada Inc. Let's get right into it.
Let's kick things off with the absolute million-dollar question right out of the gate. Can a non-resident actually register a business in Canada? The short answer? An enthusiastic yes, you absolutely can. But, and there's always a but, the exact registration structure you're going to need depends heavily on a few key nuances. We're talking about things like where exactly you incorporate, where you plan to operate, and what your Canadian tax obligations are going to look like.
And that brings us to the experts behind today's framework. As their motto goes, MRZ Canada Inc., we build businesses, analyze, strategize, realize. They step in to provide the critical business consulting and administrative support that international founders really need to establish a rock-solid, fully compliant presence up in Canada.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be looking at 1. Starting a Canadian business. 2. Ownership versus director rules. 3. 5 key registration requirements. 4. Taxes and extra-provincial options. 5. The immigration reality check. And finally, 6. Launching with MRZ Canada.
Okay, starting with Section 1, starting a Canadian business. Let's cover the basics for foreign founders. Get this. The core fact you need to know is that non-residents can own 100% of a Canadian corporation. You generally do not need Canadian citizenship or permanent residence just to own shares. Honestly, it's an incredibly empowering fact for global entrepreneurs. But you do need to keep a quick caveat in mind. Owning the shares doesn't mean your corporation automatically meets all the strict compliance rules under the law governing that specific region.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2, ownership versus director rules. You really need to know the difference here.
The most crucial point to understand is that business ownership and director eligibility are two completely different things in the eyes of the law. Think of it like a car. Just because you have the cash to buy a car outright doesn't mean you actually have the specific local driver's license required to legally drive it on the road. You might own all the shares as a foreign entrepreneur, but your corporation still has to satisfy the director residency rules of wherever you decided to incorporate.
And those rules vary wildly. If you go the federal route, Corporations Canada generally requires at least 25% of your directors to be resident Canadians. But look at Ontario and British Columbia. The requirement is 0%. Ontario actually went ahead and repealed its resident Canadian director requirement entirely, and BC just doesn't impose one at all. This makes Ontario and British Columbia incredibly popular choices for non-residents. But remember, don't just pick a jurisdiction based on that one detail. You really have to factor in where you'll actually operate, your tax implications, and what the banks will require. Moving on to Section 3, 5 key registration requirements. This is your administrative foundation.
Across the board, there are generally 5 vital pillars you're going to need. First up, an acceptable corporate name. This could just be a numbered corporation or a named one, which requires a formal name search. Second, a registered office address in your specific jurisdiction. Third, at least one eligible director. Fourth, your articles of incorporation, which lay out things like your share classes. And fifth, your Canadian business number, which is a unique 9-digit number the Canada Revenue Agency uses to identify you.
Now, you absolutely want to avoid these common registration traps. First, a standard P.O. box that simply cannot replace a valid physical delivery address where official legal documents can be served. Also, be super careful with virtual offices. If they're unauthorized, you might end up failing your banking or regulatory checks. Another huge no-no, never appoint a director merely to borrow their name or address. Directors have real, binding legal duties. And finally, if you're working with multiple founders or aiming for future financing, complex ownership structures really need expert planning right from day one.
All right, Section 4, taxes and extra-provincial options. Let's look at compliance beyond just the incorporation phase.
Say you already have a highly successful business running in the US, the UK, or the UAE. You might want to consider extra-provincial registration. Instead of creating a brand new Canadian subsidiary from scratch, you're essentially registering your existing foreign company to do business within a Canadian province. It is a fantastic alternative route. But a quick word of caution here. It does not automatically wipe away Canadian tax obligations, provincial licensing requirements, or payroll duties. You still gotta play by Canadian rules.
Speaking of playing by the rules, we have to talk about GST and HST. Now, not every non-resident corporation has to register for this immediately. Usually, there's a common $30,000 revenue threshold that applies. You can choose to register voluntarily before you hit that, but keep in mind, doing so triggers ongoing collection, filing, and remittance responsibilities. Also, if you run a digital business or supply digital products to Canadian consumers, special rules apply. Honestly, getting professional tax advice here is highly, highly recommended.
Because really, registration is only step one. Before you pull the trigger, you have to plan the actual launch. You need to confirm your Canadian banking readiness, understand exactly what local municipal licenses you need, evaluate your ongoing corporate maintenance costs, lock down a solid digital presence and a .ca domain, and finalize your actual Canadian market entry strategy. Without a viable operating plan in place, your shiny new registration is basically just a piece of paper.
Which brings us to Section 5, the Immigration Reality Check. It is time to bust the biggest myth out there.
Let's make this crystal clear. What a business registration provides is a legal Canadian corporate entity, a vehicle for your market entry, and a structured shareholding. What it does not provide is a visa, a work permit, permanent residence, or Canadian citizenship. Paying to register a business absolutely does not buy you immigration status, no exceptions. I really want to hammer this home because it is so critical for your planning. Business registration and immigration authorization are entirely 100% separate processes. If you or your team need authorization to actually work inside Canada, you must consult a licensed Canadian immigration lawyer or an authorized professional. Setting up a corporate registry gives you a company. It does not hand you a passport or a visa.
Finally, Section 6, Launching with MRZ Canada, Professional Consulting and Support. Look, if navigating all these regulations is making your head spin, MRZ Canada acts as the ultimate administrative partner for international founders. They provide federal and provincial incorporation support, expert guidance on those tricky registered office requirements, and they even handle the administrative heavy lifting for your business number and GST/HST. Plus, they help organize your bank readiness documents, assist with business planning and financial projections, and offer top-tier Canadian market entry consulting. They essentially build the foundation so you can focus on the launch.
Now, a quick disclaimer to keep things completely transparent about professional boundaries. MRZ Canada provides incredible business consulting and administrative support. However, they do not provide legal, tax, accounting, or immigration advice. Because every single business is unique, requirements vary by your individual circumstances, so you should always consult an appropriately licensed professional for those specific legal matters.
Bringing it right back to their core identity, MRZ Canada Inc. We build businesses. Analyze, strategize, realize. They're all about driving Canadian innovation for global impact, making sure you have the absolute best structure standing behind you. So if you are planning to establish your business in Canada, here is your crucial next step. Download the free non-resident business checklist to review all the essential decisions before you dive in, or better yet, book a free initial consultation at www.mrzcanada.ca.
I'll leave you with this final thought. The market is waiting, the roadmap is clear, and the 2026 guide is right there for the taking. Are you ready to analyze, strategize, and realize your Canadian business expansion in 2026? Take that next step today, and best of luck making your global impact.